zero bill when it shouldn't have, so we followed up, everyone's working on the correct bill, so. So sorry about that.
Oh, no.
Actually, Tom and I were gonna chat with you about it a little bit more, I think, before we bring it up here.
Okay.
I'll grab him after the meeting real quick and we'll.
Who?
Chief. Yeah, he's watching from his office on the video stream.
So we can just walk over there afterwards?
Yeah, yeah. Shouldn't take long. Over there.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Can you roll call, please?
Trustee Benson? Here. Trustee Gunther? Here. Pro Tem Jackson? Here. Trustee Mead?
Present.
Trustee Pelfrey? Here. Trustee Brand?
Here.
President Auer?
Here. Next item on the agenda is the public comments. Does anyone has any public comments? Don, you want to say something?
Yeah, there's 3 items I'd like to address. County administrator change. John Fall has been our county administrator for 4 years. We've appointed him to the position of Palisades project director because with the closing of the Palisades plant, there's millions of dollars that's possible if we have a good grant writer that we can assist in this, because there were there's a lot of income, there's a lot of people going to be missed there, that we're making a lot of money, and so and because of the nuclear power, we have to go to Holtec to get all that moved. John is one of the best grant writers we have. And replacing John, we selected Frank Hartster. He's a circuit court administrator. He's a very effective person. We think we have a really good replacement. The veteran services, we're gonna have dental again for the veterans. All they need is in Van Buren County, DD 214, so up to $1,000 for the veteran and the spouse. And also the transportation rights. We've got it set up twice a week to Battle Creek. All they do is make their appointments, let them know that we picked up at their door, take off, and dropped off. So it's a really great service. Here, I'll leave this. Here's the veterans' information. There, I'll
Awesome.
leave that with you.
Okay,
That's all I have.
we'll get it posted.
Anyone else? Any public comments? Next item on the agenda, consent agenda, additions, deletions to the agenda. Any additions or deletions to the agenda? If no additions or deletions, I need approval of the agenda as presented. Minutes from the April 5th, 2021 regular meeting. Bill and the bills and a total of $108,420.69.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second that.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Next item, correspondence, is anybody?
Yep, I got one item, just came in actually yesterday, I think. I'll leave out the name, but this person said, I just wanted to let you know that last night I had an emergency between Decatur and Dowagiac, and the first cop on the scene, then the following first responders were all amazing. I had to call 911 because I wasn't sure where a hospital was. I'm so thankful and grateful for their help and wanted to express my gratitude. I'm sorry I didn't catch the officer's name, but everyone took such good care of my 2 children and me. Thank you so much. And that was Officer Taylor. That was the first officer on the scene.
The next item is officers report. Any questions for the officers? Any questions for the report? Anyone? Matt, you want to talk about the report for a second?
I'll just touch on a couple things. Cleanup day went really well. That was held on Saturday, April 24th. I still got to crunch all the numbers, but I think altogether it was probably the biggest turnout we've seen in about 5 years. I think it was roughly about 140 to 150 participants altogether. And I think we roughly figured out it was about 16 30-yard containers, so quite a bit of cleanup that went on, so that was a great thing. It was about double the size we saw from 2020, so that was a good thing as well. The only downside was it created a few logistical challenges. I do applaud all of Public Works for handling everything real well and doing everything they could to make sure it was a successful event. Looking into the future, Jimmy and I are talking, we may look to make a few modifications here or there. One of the things that we ran into this year was with the tire recycling. That's a free program that the Conservation District offers in partnership with us. But one of the challenges is that entails residents of the county as a whole being able to bring tires to the site. So what we found was that with the number of people that were coming out from the townships and the village just to bring their waste, it created a kind of a log jam of people, and there was quite a few backed up for just tires. They really weren't from the community, so they were getting a little bit frustrated. Some of the community members that just had trash were getting a little frustrated. So Jimmy and I talked about the idea of maybe separating out tires into a different area maybe. Maybe there's an avenue, since it's usually a weekend, to work with Cargill potentially and see if that gravel area that they have there might suffice for tire drop off. I also talked with Doc Carl and Kevin Kuzmak about this and said, maybe if we're going to keep seeing this sort of turnout, which is good, maybe there's an avenue where some area in the townships might be more easily accessible for in and out traffic. That's one of the challenges, of course, is that there's one lane in and out. So a lot of it is either me or Jimmy and the guys trying to coordinate, okay, you come, no, you go, So it can be a real challenge, especially when you start getting backed up to Williams, which is kind of where it started at about 8 in the morning. So it took us quite a while to get through it, but again, the guys did a great job and we had a great turnout altogether, so we were happy with that. The other thing I'll touch on would be 4th of July. I worked with the vendor in the last few weeks trying to get everything squared away and wanted to make sure that the 4th was definitively available, and I'm happy to report that we will plan to have fireworks on the 4th of July, the day of. Roughly speaking, I think the idea was to look at costs that are going to be basically equivalent to what we had from 2019, so no increases. Per our conversation with the council last month, we didn't request any cost decreases either. So in the next couple weeks, I'll start working on getting letters out, asking for some donations. Again, like we talked about, the idea would be to try to stress that there's no obligation to do that. If you're willing to help and able to do so, fantastic. But if, with the conditions we have from COVID-19, if your business is not in the best position, don't feel like you have to donate. We can make it work. So we'll get started on that soon, and we'll see where we end up. Other than that, I think that's about it.
There's nothing under unfinished business. New business, we have ordinance 2021-001 golf carts.
So you guys have heard from a few different community members, I think probably over the last three years or so, at various times throughout the year, usually in the spring, sometimes in the summer. We've had groups of residents that have come out and asked the village to consider looking at golf carts. To this point, we hadn't really, entertained any real ordinance or resolutions or anything along those lines, but I think in the past month alone, I've had about 5 or 10 different people call me up and say, Matt, where are we at on this? We keep saying we're going to look at it. So Kim and I actually looked at Lawrence and Lawton to name 2 local entities that have an ordinance or a resolution that would permit golf carts. And I had a third, actually. I think it was the village of Quincy, which is a little ways away, but we kind of took all 3 of those and looked at what do we like from these, what don't we like from these, and kind of combined it into an ordinance that we thought would work well for us here in the village. So I'll touch on a couple things with it. If it was adopted, the ordinance would permit golf carts on village streets, but there's restrictions that would be involved in the process. So some of the big items there would be operators would have to be at least 16 years old with a driver's license. You'd have to have a slow-moving vehicle sign on the back of the golf cart. It's kind of that orange triangle with a red outline, I believe. And there's visibility requirements that go into that. They're not allowed on any street from a half hour before sunset to a half hour after sunrise. So essentially no usage when it's dark. They're not permitted on any state or federal highways except to cross in the most direct route possible. And then for us, we actually made the Phelps Street crossing against the rules entirely. After looking at it, we didn't feel that there was a real need to see golf carts right at the heart of downtown, that you could use George Street or William Street and accomplish the same thing, even if you have to go around the block a little. But we were just concerned about the impact of potentially backing up traffic right on the main thoroughfare in town. So we did exclude that. And then everyone, any passengers that would be under the age of 6 would have to wear a crash or bicycle helmet while in the vehicle as well. So we looked at it, and the idea was that you can't necessarily, you don't want to charge for, the fees have to be, I guess not necessarily reasonable, but you have to be careful with how you assess those fees. They don't actually allow you to charge like any amount that you'd like. So it's not like we could set an arbitrary amount and say, okay, we're going to charge $30 annually for registration. They don't really allow you to do that. But in this case, the reason for the fee is we're proposing that a sticker be utilized. Kim and I could work, we have a kind of a mock-up there just with the village logo, but the idea is you would have a sticker that is good for 3 years, and what that actually covers, that $10, is just the cost of the sticker. And then Kim would actually maintain a list of all the registered golf carts in the village. So if there was an issue, say somebody calls and said, hey, I saw a golf cart that was driving erratically or whatever, we could go check it out, and do they have all the requirements? Do you have your sticker? Oh, you don't have the sticker. Did you register with the village? And then we could obviously facilitate that. So I think it would actually turn out pretty well. In terms of penalties, the way that we have it set up right now is it would be considered a municipal infraction. $50 would be for any first offense for a violation of the ordinance, $100 for a second offense, and then $250 for any subsequent offenses. And the way that we gauge this is it's built in that all offenses that count would be in the previous 30 days. So it wouldn't be something where, oh, you had an offense last year, so now you're gonna pay the $100. You know, it's a reasonable time frame, I think, there, but enough of a step up for each of the offenses that it does act as, I think, an effective deterrent for not following the rules. And then we also have it listed too that if any damage were to occur to the environment, the road, or any other property, so say somebody's yard, for example, the golf cart operator would be required to cover full restitution of all damages in addition to any fines or fees that could be applicable as well. So I think, you know, based on the feedback we've had, this is a good time to look at this. We can all agree, I think, that when you look at the number of visitors that have come in and requested us to consider this, and I think in some cases, you know, some of us actually seen residents using golf carts, and we end up having to send the police out to, hey, you can't use those on any street. And, you know, from looking at it, it seemed that rather than restricting it entirely and having to kind of chase everybody down that happens to take it out onto a street, a better avenue might be to permit them, but make sure we regulate how they're used and do it in a way where we can ensure that they're only operating in a manner that we deem to be appropriate.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and the other thing I guess would say is that, you know, we talked about the idea of a unified approach with Decatur and Hamilton Township. I've had a few conversations with them, and you know, I think they're certainly considering it, but it doesn't seem like there's a real push to try to address something right away. And I guess the way I look at it would be is that the village is its own entity. We don't necessarily, just because if Decatur Township or Hamilton Township chose to opt in, we would still have to evaluate it, so there's that. And then I guess I don't really see why the village itself can't take the lead on this. You know, I think in some ways you could argue that there's probably more of a desire to see the village opt in when you look at, you know, our parks and things like that. There's probably more residents in our area that would really get a benefit out of this than probably either of the townships would. You know, that might be more specific to select neighborhoods, but I think a policy like this for the village could actually serve a lot of benefit.
Any discussions, any idea, any questions?
I do have a question, Matt.
Sure.
So who is going to get the citation, the driver or the owner? And the only reason I ask that is because in the penalty section, you say issue a citation to any person, firm, or corporation.
I think it would essentially be
Is that the?
whoever it is that is
The driver's
operating the
section.
vehicle. Let's see. If after investigation by I think the idea there was that it would more than likely go to the operator of the vehicle, but if, for example, it was a business that had the golf cart and they caused, say, property damage or something, we could potentially hold the business that runs the golf cart responsible as well. So there's some flexibility there. I think the intent would normally be that whoever's operating it would be responsible. But in some cases, like if somebody's on, I guess a lot of these are kind of designed with the idea that, you know, we're trying to look at all the different scenarios that could come up. So maybe there is somebody that's actually on an official company business, but they happen to be in a golf cart. In those cases, the company might take on the bill, but, you know, the operator itself would be the one that would have caused that. So I think the idea was to try to allow for some flexibility.
You may want to change it to the operator of the vehicle. Just let's simplify it.
We could change that to
Just like
the
we drive a car,
operator.
just like driving a car.
Yeah, I mean, you could change that, so instead of it reading a municipal civil infraction citation to any person, firm, or corporation, that is, you could just have it say, the operator responsible for violating the provisions of this ordinance. I think that would make
What do you
sense.
think, Matt? Think that's reasonable?
I do.
Any questions? Anybody else? So what do you want from the council?
Well, I guess there's a couple ways we could go about it. You know, we did include a registration form that you guys could see, just a sample we had mocked up. and then a sample sticker. You know, if you guys are happy with what's presented here with the modification or with the amendment, you could certainly go ahead and make a motion to pass the ordinance as amended.
Let me ask you, did you get the chance to read this? Any chance, ma'am?
I have not looked at that in detail. If you were asking for my comment, I would consider the penalty be increased.
Okay.
I always hate prosecuting those, feeling like it's just a slap on their wrist and they really don't care when it's that small of a penalty.
Okay.
Then you guys end up paying me to go after somebody for half
$50.
of. Yeah, and consider what you're paying me to do that. If they string it out through court, it's a bad process.
So what do you think?
Sure.
What's the recommendation? What do you think?
What was your schedule?
It was 50, 100, and 250. So 50 for the first, 100 for the second, and then 250 for any subsequent.
Want to double that?
I would think so.
Okay.
You could do 100, 200, and 500. I think that does serve as a good deterrent as well, that if you don't follow the rules, you're going to pay a hefty penalty for it also.
Is everybody comfortable with voting for the ordinance tonight? Anybody agree? Okay, any motion?
I'll make the motion to approve the ordinance as amended.
I'll support. Okay, trustee Jackson, trustee Gunter, I need a roll call, please.
Trustee Benson?
Yes.
Trustee Gunther?
Yes.
Pro Tem Jackson?
Yes.
Trustee Mead?
Yes.
Trustee Pelfrey?
Yes.
Trustee Brandt?
Yes.
President Howard?
Yes, so all in favor, motion carries. Next item on the agenda is village tax collection.
Yeah, so as we talked about last month, there's been a change in state law that went into effect, I think it was in May of last year. We didn't act on it at that point, but we've talked with the county treasurer now, and we think that there's an avenue here that making a change would make sense for us. So with village tax collections, the way we do it now, just as a refresher, is that when July 1st rolls around, that's when tax season starts for the village. And to this point, we had collected taxes up until September 15th. At that point, we turned them over to the county. They dealt with all delinquent collections, and then as of, I think it's February 28th, that's when they kind of reconciled who paid, who didn't, and deal with posting any special assessments or things like that for future years. So the option now would be is that villages can actually continue to take taxes even after that delinquent period. So essentially we're talking about here that September 15th through February 28th timeframe. So there was two scenarios that we were given as possible options that other villages have done. The first one would be the township actually collecting the taxes on behalf of the village. So in that scenario, as everybody knows, you generally will get 3 tax bills throughout the year. So the first would be your summer taxes, the village tax comes at that same time, and then you've got your winter taxes for the township as well. So under that scenario, they'd only actually get 2 taxes. So the village tax would be listed on your summer tax bill for the township. That's a viable option. It does help, I guess, in terms of reducing the number of bills somebody's responsible for, but Kim and I talked about it, and I think there's a couple challenges that come with that. First, I believe from what the township indicated, they would be in the office twice a month. While that's helpful, we're in the office every day. So I think being able to come here to pay your taxes and talk with Kim or myself or Evelyn about getting receipts, things like that, I think is a better avenue. And then for us, we do have, obviously Kim, who's a full-time clerk and treasurer. So she's trained to take taxes. She knows how to do that. So I don't really see a need to necessarily offload that process to the township. It's one avenue, but for us, we do have a website that's easily navigable for most folks. We have online payment options for taxes. The township is working on those things, but our system's already there, it's already functional, and it works. So I don't know if I'm necessarily sold on the idea of making any big change there. The other scenario, which I think Kim and I have talked about, and Kim said she's more than willing to take this up, would essentially be the village continuing those taxes in that same time frame. So right now, after September 15th, instead of it going to the county at that point, people would be able to come in here and still pay any delinquent taxes that might be owed. Our tax system already actually accounts for this, so even after that date, it'll tell us if there's any penalty fees or late fees that have to be added. It calculates that for us. So it really makes the process pretty simple. And the other advantage is that right now, when we turn our taxes over to the county, we don't actually have any idea what's collected, what isn't. They don't really send us reports and database updates as well. We kind of just get a check and say, here's all the taxes we collected. Here's where it gets distributed. Well, we can record the revenues that way, but if somebody then calls us and says, hey, can you tell me if my taxes got paid? We're not always able to tell. We can say, well, according to what we have, it doesn't look like they were, but did you pay them at the county? And create some challenges. And then I think the last point of all this is that whether it was the township or us, the idea that we're going to cut down on confusion, I don't think necessarily holds weight. People are going to probably come up here to try to pay taxes no matter what. I mean, even if the township was the one responsible, we'd still probably get 100 people from the time July 1st rolls around to September saying, I need to pay my taxes, I'm here to do that. And rather than saying, oh, we can't take that, you got to go over there, I think it just makes more sense for us to take the village taxes here. So with either of those two choices, if we were to look at those, we would have a resolution that we would pass. Kim and I just got the resolution. We didn't get a chance to get it squared away for now, but we'll talk later in the meeting, but we are planning on having a special meeting. So the idea would be to present a resolution for you guys to approve at that point, in whatever direction you guys think would be the best for us to head.
Any questions? I already gave you my opinion last meeting, so.
Yes.
I think if we could collect them here through the transfer, that would be awesome for the people. I mean, there've been so many problems, just people telling me of the issues they've had trying to pay the county.
Yeah.
So if we can keep it here, I think we need to.
I think that would be a good idea.
Yep.
So would you need a motion for us to authorize, you want it now, or you want to wait until the special?
You could. I mean, I guess if nothing else, it would kind of show our intent of what the village council would like to see, and then that Kim and I will go ahead and get the formal resolution ready, and then we'll adopt a resolution like we normally would.
We need a motion then to authorize the village of Decatur to collect delinquent village taxes through February 28th. Is that what the?
Yeah, essentially, I kind of put an either or. I put an either or option. Yeah, this would be every year. I think what the plan would be, I guess I'll go into a little bit more detail. One example we found that I think really works well is that you can actually pass a resolution annually that you, along the same lines as with the budget. So you can actually, in the budget resolution, where you disclose what the millage rates are going to be and all of that, you can actually also incorporate this right into that and say, we're also going to collect taxes through February 28th. So this will be kind of a separate scenario where we'll do it this year, and then going forward, it'll just be incorporated right into the budget resolution itself.
I'll make the motion to authorize the village of Decatur to collect delinquent village taxes through February 28th.
Jeff, need a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Do you need a roll call on this one?
No, not for this. We will for the resolution, yeah.
So motion passes. Next item on the agenda is skid steer logo.
Yeah, so we've talked about this for about a year and a half now. I think the first time we brought this up was going back to the budget committee from last year. When we talked about it then, the idea was for us to potentially look at finding a used piece of equipment. The idea was to see if we could try to find something that had low hours but would result in some sort of a significant savings over trying to buy new. We spent a lot of time trying to find the right piece of equipment and just could not find one that fell into that sweet spot of, you know, a moderate amount of hours where, you know, we're not concerned about significant maintenance right away, but a price that resulted in really significant savings over a new piece. I think when, the closest we found was, you know, there was a couple that I think they had fairly low hours, but the difference in price versus a new one was like a couple $1,000s. Well, at that point, we might as well buy something new and have the warranty. So we brought this back to the budget committee for this year's budget, and we increased the total amount anticipated for expense to cover the cost of a new one. At that point, of course, pricing fluctuates a little bit, so we made our best guess there. But just to give an overview, this would replace the John Deere 4610. Now that right now is primarily used for mowing at the sewer lagoons and along road shoulders. So with this piece of equipment, we've had CAT specify this out to include the brush cutter that would allow us to address those mowing concerns. It has a bucket, and it would also have the forks for being able to lift up pallets and things like that. And one of the nice things about the skid steer is that there's a lot of versatility here. So when you look at places like Paw Paw Rental, for example, you can get attachments, whether you're, say, boring a hole or something like that. If there's something that we need and we don't have it, if it attaches to the skid steer, we can go and rent it for a day or two and then have the capability of doing that. So versus something like a new tractor, this has a lot more functionality that we can utilize there. So when we reached out to CAT, they actually quoted us with a My Deal price. So we purchased our PD vehicles in that same program. Essentially, the price is already pre-negotiated by the state on behalf of villages and cities. So it's usually going to be the lowest cost you could find, and we couldn't find any other price that would beat this. Same program we purchased the excavator and loader. Same sort of program that we did with that. Now altogether, the total cost came to $62,365.53. Now, originally the budget was for $55,000, so we're talking a difference of about $7,400 roughly. Now, one thing we didn't build into the budget automatically was disposing of the 4610. I would assume we'll have a couple $1,000s in revenues that will come after we sell that. Maybe even more. I guess a lot of it depends on how interested somebody might be in used John Deere tractor. And I think after you factor that in, you're probably looking at a difference of maybe in the ballpark of $4,000 to $5,000. I think that's pretty close. You know, again, I think when we were talking about this last fall and last winter, we were going based on the best numbers that we had at that point, and of course things change and fluctuate. So, you know, I don't think it's a big issue. All of this expense would come out of the motor pool fund, and right now I think, I don't have it off the top of my head, but looking at the cash summary report, we have $399,000 in the motor pool fund, so I think it wouldn't be an issue to be able to absorb that cost. I don't foresee that one purchase being a problem. It may result in a slight budget amendment at the end of the year, but we do also have a dually we were looking to purchase, and it's possible we might be able to find a deal on one of those where it undercuts the cost we had anticipated. So, you know, I don't know where we'll fall with that just yet, but I think looking at the minimal difference in the cost versus what we had estimated, I still think it's something worthwhile to go forward with.
Jimmy, how old is this tractor that's going to be?
2,000,
Okay.
21 years old. That's, I would think that.
That's why you said $2,000.
I would think, because it does have a brush hog with it.
Okay.
So if we were to sell the unit, the tractor with a brush hog, I mean, tractors bring pretty good money, even, it's in rough shape, but you still might be able to get the difference.
Yeah, I mean, it would be close. I guess I didn't want to necessarily guarantee that that would happen, but that would be the goal.
You know, and I don't know either, but I would definitely, I would say if you put 5,000 on that tractor to start with, you know,
Now,
you probably have some people interested.
now with this piece of equipment, would it do the lagoons, the
Yeah.
extension, it extends the cut of the grass and.
Yeah, that's what the 6-foot
Okay.
brush mower is for, and we'd actually be able to do, like Matt said, road shoulders,
Well,
the
yeah.
detention pond that we actually right now hire JC to do.
Yeah, okay.
So, I mean,
Then-
and his big thing, like he said, is the attachments. You know, we have to bust concrete out, you can go right over to Paw Paw, rent an attachment for that unit. have it for a day and be
Yeah,
done.
we talked about the safety of
Yep.
the workers doing around the lagoons. You know, there's a safety concern there. This probably would help with that, mitigate that issue.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Any questions from the council? There's no questions, any motion to approve the purchase of this? Let me see what it is.
I will make the motion to approve the purchase of the skid steer.
I'll second that.
Mr. Duran, trustee Mead, roll call please.
Trustee Benson?
Yes.
Trustee Gunther?
Yes.
Pro Tem Jackson?
Yes.
Trustee Mead?
Yes.
Trustee Pelfrey?
Yes.
Trustee Brand?
Yes.
President Howard?
Yes. All in favor, motion carries. The next item on the agenda is Village Industrial Park.
Yes, so we've talked about this a couple times really over the last year. I think the last time we brought this up was towards the end of last year and early this year maybe. You know, the village owns roughly about 35 to 40 acres of land out by the lagoons. I think from talking with Mickey, it was about 10, 12 years ago that was designated as an industrial park. But in the intervening time frame, we haven't really done a lot in terms of development. You know, we had Hometown Collision came in and purchased 2 parcels over the last couple of years, and they've built a business out there, which is fantastic. But there's still a lot of usable land there. And I've actually been approached about, I think from about 3 or 4 different interested parties over the last couple months on asking us would we consider selling the property. In particular, they are interested in the 4.37 acre parcel that is basically what's left over after Hometown Collision had purchased their 2 parcels, and in some cases, the 21 acre parcel behind it. So there's a couple different avenues we could take. Now, selling the property as is, one of the nice things is that we're not really concerned about the development costs. You know, we're not really going out and outside of potentially having to look at a survey. It's really pretty simple. But there's a couple downsides. With something like that, you're normally selling it to one entity. So in terms of future development, you're potentially kind of limiting the number of businesses that could develop in that area. So instead of saying, for example, we're going to create 4 or 5, 4 acre parcels, you might end up with one group that buys all, say in the end it's 18 acres. Maybe they buy all of that and say, well, we're going to just own all this. We want to have the extra land. We're not interested in really selling it to anybody else, etc. So it does still create a new development in the area, but it might not be as dense as it could have been if you'd have changed the way that you did it. So a lot of this really comes down to the level of involvement the village wants to have with the process, and then essentially what inputs we're willing to invest into something like this. So a good example would be with that 4.37 acre parcel, there was a small section to the bottom, to the south of that, where it was reserved for a potential access road down the line. So the idea was if we were to put in a road that would come down to part of that 20 acres behind it, you could then create parcels there and sell those up into individual pieces and say, okay, well, here's 4 acres for sale, here's another 5, here's 6, etc. Now, that's not to say you couldn't have a business come in and say, oh, I need 9 acres, I want all of that to the north. That might make sense. But if you just sell it to one entity, you're kind of limiting some of that. So I started kind of looking at this, and admittedly, when I started going down the track of, okay, what avenues would we have? There's about 8 different options that really come to mind. So even if you're just going to sell it, you could list it on the market and have a realtor help you sell it. You could do a sealed bid system and say, okay, we're going to sell this piece, put in a bid, and we'll evaluate it on this date. That's one way. We could do an RFP process where we request proposals from people for what developments they'd like to proceed with, and the council could then evaluate what do we think is the best avenue. Now, conversely, another avenue, and when Mickey and I talked, he said that we've been grappling with this for, like I said, about 10, 12 years now, and I guess this question has been asked by me, and now I think the last 4 predecessors I've had, according to Mickey, is what's the best avenue? And it's a difficult question. So I asked him, I said, well, would there be any benefit to looking at maybe partnering with Whiteman or something along those lines of coming up with an actual development plan. To say, here's what we think would make sense. Here's Avenue A, which would include the village putting this in to make this possible. Here's a preliminary study of when we look at some of the wetland areas or the lagoons, how close can you conceivably get to the lagoon to make sure that, you know, flooding isn't a concern or other things like that. Mud Lake is right there. That's another great question, is how much of that would be permissible for sale? I mean, right now we could take a guess, but we don't necessarily want to sell property to somebody and then have them come back and say, well, thanks, but 80% of this I can't do anything with. You know, I don't want to put somebody in that spot. I mean, granted, the onus would be on them to make sure they could develop it in the first place, but I think there is some benefit to the village looking at trying to come up with the formal plan and trying to determine if we were to sell this and we take an RFP type approach, what would that look like? And what are the options for the village in terms of future development? So after talking with Mickey, he said that Whiteman would be more than willing to potentially work with us on at least a preliminary plan. We wouldn't be going into a bunch of crazy detail as to this is exactly how it's going to work and we're going to build a road and we're going to do that. You know, that could come later. But to have a preliminary idea of what would it look like in terms of development, what are the most likely avenues the village could take, what out there do we think is actually something that could be developed? You know, when we look at, there's a couple power poles there, there's a cell tower, how do we incorporate those things into a future sale? How does that work? So what I'm looking at here essentially is just to kind of gauge what the council might think about this. When I talked with Mickey, he said that they would be willing to put together a proposal for us as to what industrial park plan might look like. And then my response was, well, let me run this through the council and have you guys consider the different avenues we could take and then decide, would you even want me to procure a bid for something like that? Or do we want to try to take a more hands-off approach and just try to sell it as it sits?
Any idea, any questions from the council? Discussion?
I mean, I think, to me, if we don't know what we're going into it, it's like giving a book report and you didn't read the book.
Yeah, that's kind of how it feels.
It's kind of like, let's figure out what we have and that'll give us some idea of what we should do with it.
Yeah.
What would be the effect in the lagoons, Jimmy?
I'm not sure if there's any questions with the lagoons. But taking what they're saying, total acreage, being that we've sold most of the front road frontage, there's, I mean, obviously without doing any measuring, I'm just thinking in my head, there's literally maybe 6 acres back there that would be, if you want to call it buildable, usable. Once you get back, number one, we have a sewer main that comes through there, so obviously we don't want no buildings, and I don't think they could anyways, because it drops off. I mean, that sewer main is literally 6 foot below ground, probably at the deepest spot.
Mm-hmm.
And then it drops right into Mud Lake. I mean, I don't know if any of you have ever been back there, but there's not a whole lot of usable ground. I'm not saying that something couldn't go in back there, but I wouldn't put a whole lot of effort into this. I mean, we had it for sale for how many years, and we did get a couple out there on the road frontage, but the back part is, I'm sorry, it's useless sand, and to get somebody back in there, I just don't think it's gonna happen.
Any discussions?
And I guess one last thing is that kind of with the idea here is we wouldn't necessarily approve a set direction now. My intent was to see if we were all in agreement, partly because we've had some questions about whether we'd sell it. So I can give them a response, here's what direction we're going to take, was to just start the process of what would it cost us. And then from that, the village could decide from there that cost is too high. We don't want to do that. Or, what, this makes sense, let's do that. So that's really all we're looking at is just permission to procure a quote for what it would cost.
seeing what we have out there.
So there will be no buildings or anything closer to the lagoon. I'm just worried about the structure integrity of the lagoon. If say you sell it to somebody and they do some kind of stuff down there, will it affect the integrity of the lagoons?
No, and I mean, that would.
Because it'd be too far, whatever it is.
Yeah, there's, obviously, there's room out there for certain things, you know. I guess what I'm trying to say, you're not gonna put another special light in that area,
No,
you know what I'm saying?
So I need a motion then if you want to.
yeah, it's just to authorize me to get a quote from Mickey.
I need a motion to, for the mayor to obtain a quote for the preparation of an industrial park development. If anybody's gonna be.
I would make that motion.
I need a second.
I will second that.
Trustee Benson, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, okay, motion carries. Next item is a special meeting.
Okay, so we've gone about this a couple different ways in the past, but I figured it'd be easiest to touch on it right here when everybody's here. Jimmy and I are working with Whiteman and Associates on 2 grant proposals. These 2 programs would be the Community Development Block Grant. That was actually the one we pursued last year with the Cedar Street project, where we had Cedar, Austin, Memory Lane, that whole area. We're working on a similar program this year. It'll be a little bit different. With that particular application, all of that is kind of rolled into the USDA funding that we're working on right now. So with Jimmy and I, we got together and looked at water projects and said, thinking about lead and copper and some of those things that are coming down the pipe, what would be the next best area where we could look at? And so St. Mary's is more than likely going to be what we would consider for that. It would include road work and water main and potentially sewer main. We're still working to finalize all of that. And then there's also a Category B program. We did apply for that last year for George Street. We've got a couple different avenues. We could look at George again, but there's usually extra points that they award if it's multiple infrastructure types. So if it's road and sewer or road and water, you get a little bit more benefit out of applying where you're doing other work as well. So we've talked about Beer Street for about 5 years now, I think. That's one of the avenues we looked at with this sort of program. Now, with the grants, they require a couple things. So we have to have a public hearing on the applications themselves. And then there's resolutions that would be passed by the council in support of those. So since we were still working on trying to finalize the applications and get the project squared away, Mickey had called me and we talked about it and said, well, probably the best avenue to meet that June 1st deadline would be to try to hold something towards the end of May. That way we've had enough time to really go through the applications and make sure we have everything right where we want it to be, but give us enough time to make sure we can apply and do any last minute touches that need to be updated. So when I talked with Mickey, and he would be here for that one, he said that with Wednesday, May 26th would work well. For him, 6 or 7 o'clock would work. I didn't know if anybody had a preference either way, and we could look at other dates if necessary, but we thought that was a good time because it's that last week in May, but the next council meeting wouldn't actually be until June 7th, so you get a week between, roughly a week and a half, between when we would have this meeting and the next regular meeting. It gives us about 3 weeks from today to be able to get everything ready, get public hearing notices in the paper, etc. So I thought timing-wise it would work well. Obviously, with all of you, we wanted to double check and see if that time would work for you.
Does it work for everyone? You don't need a.
No, I mean, we wouldn't have to have everybody. I mean, we're just a
No,
quorum.
I'm just saying you don't even need a motion to have a special meeting, so.
No.
You just post it at that time, that you know what, you take care of that.
Yeah, if that date works for everybody, we would just post it.
What was the date again, Matt?
The May 26th. It's a Wednesday. Basically, I think it's 3 weeks from this Wednesday.
And then at 6 or 7?
Yeah, I guess we could be flexible. I mean, I guess it depends. 7 gives a little more time to get home from work.
Yeah, if it's 7 probably better.
And I don't think it'll be long. We would just have the the grants, and that'll probably be a pretty quick process, and then the resolution for taxes, I think, is about it. Maybe one MRTMA facility application, but I don't think it'll be long. It'd probably be about 20 minutes, a half hour. So 7 o'clock?
26th at 7.
26th. All right.
We don't need that.
No, no.
Any public comments? Any, go ahead, sir.
You're all right, on the golf cart, all right, when would them permits be available to people?
With the ordinance, those take effect usually 30 days from the date of publication. So we would work to get that down to the Decatur Republican, and my guess would be we'd probably be looking at about June 5th, somewhere in there. So it'll be just at the start of the summer.
Are you gonna put like rules and regulations on that?
Yes, yeah, what we have in the paper will probably be, it's not really long, I guess we would probably publish the whole ordinance. So then everybody will have a chance to be able to review it and see what are the rules, what do I need to do or not do, and our plan would be to make sure that gives us, the other thing I guess is it gives us about a month to make sure our registration forms are finalized, order stickers that we need for the golf carts and
Where would
everything.
where would they have to go on the golf carts, on the back?
I think it was the rear fender on the driver's side. Yep.
Put it on the bumper.
Or the bumper, I mean, there's,
Do it on the back bumper.
That's something that you go.
yeah,
See,
well,
like mine, I got taillights on mine,
yep,
and my Yamaha is about like this here, well, if you tell me my taillights there, I ain't got roof.
sure, I mean, I think we can be somewhat flexible there, I mean, essentially we wanted it, I think the idea was to have it on the driver's side or the rear of the vehicle, so that if you're driving down, you could
Right.
see it, that was the idea, so I think we could have some
I
flexibility.
mean, if I
there.
got to, I can add a piece to mine, because I'm fixing to paint mine.
Yeah, I think we could make it work.
That's, that's something you figure out what you guys get.
Yeah, you can get together with Kim once everything goes into effect, and, you know, between
Tom
the two of
and
us, we'll get it squared away, and the
All
chief
right.
of police too, yep.
Okay.
Thanks. Any more comments? Okay, no more comments, we have, the next item is council comments, any comments from the council, Mr. Valera, anything? Thank you, guys.
Finally, it's not really a comment, it's a question. Do we know when we're gonna have bathrooms open at Raider on
Hopefully tomorrow.
tomorrow? Thank you.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Okay, I don't have any comments, so last thing is, I need a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Trustee Meany, second.
I'll second.
Trustee Valera, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye.